Good evening, everyone. We're still experiencing some technical difficulties, so what I'm going to do is go ahead and begin the meeting. We have two cases we're hearing this evening. One is a text amendment, which shouldn't take us long to get through, and so we're going to move that to the first part of the agenda, and then we'll hear the adjustment for the plan development at 999 through 1015 Howard after that. So, ready to go?
Yep.
Good evening and welcome. This is the August 24th, 2022 public hearing of the Land Use Commission. The City Code directs this body to hear applications for map and text amendments, special uses including plan developments, zoning relief, and appeals from decisions of the zoning administrator, as well as to make recommendations regarding the city's long-term planning goals and objectives. Depending on the type of matter, this commission will either make a final determination or send its recommendation to City Council. Ms. Jones, would you please call the staff, or please call the roll?
Commissioner Aravallo?
Here.
Commissioner Halleck?
Here.
Commissioner Cullen? Commissioner Westerberg?
Here.
Commissioner Marinchev?
Here.
Commissioner Johnson? Commissioner Linwall?
Here.
Commissioner Hugo?
Here.
Commissioner Patel?
Here.
And Chair Rogers.
Present. So with 8 members present, we do have a quorum. Also present tonight from city staff are Neighborhood and Land Use Planner Megan Jones, Assistant City Attorney Alex Ruggie, Zoning Administrator Melissa Klotz, Planning Manager Liz Williams, and Interim Community Development Director Sarah Flax. This is a formal hearing, and there are rules that govern our proceedings. Most importantly, only one person speaks at a time, so all testimony may be accurately recorded. Anyone who wishes to address the commission regarding any matter on tonight's agenda will have the opportunity to do so at the appropriate time. Commissioners may ask questions at any time. Our procedure is to hear from staff on the documents on file and then receive testimony and other evidence from the applicant or appellant. After that, persons wishing to make a statement regarding the matter will have a chance to do so. Any person with a legal interest in property located within the defined notification requirements of the subject property may present evidence, reasonably question witnesses, or seek a continuance of the hearing. When all supporting and opposing testimony and statements have been heard, the applicant or appellant will be given the opportunity for rebuttal or a closing statement. Then the commission will close the record and begin deliberations to consider the standards. The commission will make formal findings of fact based on the testimony and evidence presented, guided by the standards, the commissioner's knowledge of our community, and the recommendations of staff. All testimony is taken under oath. Although we do not apply the strict rules of evidence, please limit your testimony to the proposal as it relates to the standards contained in the zoning ordinance and corresponding staff memorandum. When testifying, please state your name and address for the record and sign in on the public comment sheet. Our meetings are audio and video recorded. Please make sure that you are at a microphone when asking questions or making statements so that you can be properly recorded. All proceedings are subject to broadcast at a later date. Any matter not concluded at tonight's hearing will be continued to our next regularly scheduled meeting. We do have 3 items on the agenda tonight. One of the items has been withdrawn, which was noticed. If anybody is here to address us on 1930 Sherman Avenue, 22 ZMJV 0054, that has been withdrawn and will not be heard this evening. Do we know, is there a plan for when it will be coming back, or is it just kind of a...
We have not heard from the applicant whether or not they will re-engage on this application, but they will have to resubmit and will undergo noticing and all of that under a new application.
All right, thank you. So the items we do have on the agenda tonight are 22 PLND 0053, a major adjustment to a planned development located at 999 through 1015 Howard Street. The applicant is here. And the text amendment for restaurants in an MXE MXE district, which is 22 PLND 0055, and that's being directed by the city. Are we up and running?
We're close. Where's the mouse? Oh, it's out there. Okay.
Okay.
Actually, it might be better.
Do you want to give it to David?
Yeah, it might be better.
I will note for the record that Commissioner Johnson has just joined us as well. Therefore, we have 9 present this evening.
We're gonna do mine and not the text.
I think since we've got everything moving, the order.
Okay.
Can we do control L to put that on here?
There we go.
Okay, so actually there
Should be a mouse over here too.
or a clicker that can adjust. No, it's usually after they.
Keyboard?
Yeah.
Great.
Before we get to hearing any of the cases tonight, we do have to approve our meeting minutes from August 10th, 2022. Has everyone had an opportunity to review those, and are there any edits before we approve them? Is there a motion to approve the minutes from August 10th, 2022?
A motion to approve the minutes?
Moved by Lindwall. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second from Westerberg. Any further discussion? Hearing none.
I'll abstain.
Mr. Patel is abstaining because he was not present there. I will abstain for a portion of the meeting, so I will abstain for the whole meeting because I was not able to hear one case because I had to recuse myself. Therefore, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? So that should be 7 in favor with 2 abstentions, and the motion carries. The minutes are approved. That takes us to the first case that we have this evening. Before I hand it over to Mr. Block, I'm going to ask that anybody who plans on speaking to us tonight on either this case or any other case be sworn at this time by raising your right hand. And do you swear or affirm to tell the truth throughout the course of these proceedings?
I swear.
Thank you. With that, I will turn it over to Ms. Jones to read it into the record.
Things to load. David Block, applicant, submits for a major adjustment to the plan development approved by ordinance 8-0-20 in the B2 Business District. The applicant is requesting to modify the approved building elevations. Land Use Commission makes a recommendation to the City Council, the determining body for this case, in accordance with Section 6398 of the Evanston Zoning Code and Ordinance 92-021.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. For the record, I will announce that I am abstaining from this because I have been involved in discussions with this project before the time that I joined this commission. This has been an ongoing project, and I've advised Mr. Block as well as members of the neighborhood and people involved with this. So at this point, I will be handing the gavel over to Mr. Patel, who will be acting chair for hearing this particular case.
Okay, good evening, everybody. All right, so the case is read into the record. Applicant, can you please state your name and address and present your case?
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is David Block. I am the Director of Development and Principal with Evergreen Real Estate Group. My office is downtown at 566 West Lake Street in Chicago, but I've been an Evanston resident. I live on Sherman Avenue for about 16 years. So thank you for hearing us this evening. By the way, I should note that we have a representative from our architect here, Dominic Hart from Urban Works Architecture, and also our attorney, Steve Friedland from Applegate and Thorne Thompson here tonight as well. We're here, I think, largely because of a quirk in Evanston zoning code. As you can see in the photo, and that's a picture that I took, I think, this morning, we have a building here, and the building has been substantially complete for some time. And I think you probably have a sense that the process of finishing a building requires a series of inspections and reviews by City of Evanston staff. So the building has gone through all of its various inspections of health and safety issues on behalf of structural, electrical, mechanical, plumbing inspectors, and so on and so forth. And the last stop in this process, so we got sign-off from the city, and we received a temporary certificate of occupancy for this building back in March. So the building is now essentially fully occupied. We have one more tenant moving in this week, and we have our final 60th tenant moving in next week. So the building is, for all intents and purposes, 100% full with low-income seniors, 62 and up. And I can talk a little bit toward the end about, sort of who those folks are. But the final step in the process is to convert a temporary certificate of occupancy to a final certificate of occupancy. And so after you get final sign-off from all of the various city health and safety departments, it comes to the zoning department for final sign-off. And when it got to the zoning stage, they looked at what was in the plan development ordinance that was passed back in 2019, and they compared it with what we actually built. And they said, well, you don't comply. There are changes to the facade that meet the standard for a major adjustment under the plan development ordinance. And so that's why we're here this evening. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the history of this building, but I think before I do that, I wanted to just show you some pictures. So this is going to be a very visual presentation because fundamentally that is what the zoning staff in the city of Evanston is evaluating visually whether this building substantially complies with the city of Evanston zoning code. So again, here is the building as it is this morning, looking east down Howard Street. Oops. And that was the original, I'm going to stand over here so I can see the screen. That was the original architect's rendering that was put into the plan development ordinance, again, about 3 years ago. And so you can see some differences, and I'll flip back and forth a little bit to identify the differences. Most of the differences, do I have a laser here? Oh, cool, look at that. Most of the differences are on this piece of the building, which we call the bridge. So if you remember what this building was before, and I have some images of that as well. Our partner in this project is CJE Senior Life, formerly the Council on Jewish Elderly. And CJE occupied and will continue to occupy an adult daycare facility here at this part of the site. At 1015 Howard Street. And they run a program for seniors with dementia in there, and part of this project was to do a renovation of their space. And so they will be moving back into that space very soon. But the changes that got made to the facade were largely in this area of the bridge, including a little bit kind of wrapping around onto the western face of the building here. And then in what we call the window box areas. If you look at the window boxes that we actually built versus what you see in the rendering here, there are some decorative elements that were not included. And the real reasons for that have to do with the most challenging development, design, and construction environment in any of our professional careers. We got approval for this project pre-COVID. We got approval for this project about 3 months before the shutdowns. So the ordinance was approved in December of 2019. March, obviously, we know what happened after that. We closed on our financing and started construction in October of 2020. And so we fought our way through a series of challenges, financial challenges, schedule challenges, which I'll come back to in a minute. In order to get this building complete. That was partially funded, by the way, by the City of Evanston. The City of Evanston has $2 million in this building, for which we are very grateful. And this is a home now for 60 low-income seniors, about 40 to 45% of whom actually lived in Evanston prior to moving into this building, and no doubt they struggled with rent escalation, or perhaps they had a house that they could no longer afford. And now they have a place with a stable, affordable rent, brand new building in a great location with a series of amenities. So we're really looking at the visual aspect of the building. I'm going to keep going here. So again, you see the comparison of the visual elements. I'm just going to show you a series of images, and then we'll come to kind of some of the technical side of what we were dealing with. So in terms of landscaping, I think everybody knows that Howard Street underwent a major streetscape improvement project. And if you remember what was here before, there was a dead Dairy Queen. There was a hot dog stand for a while. I'm not sure what else was there. And then there was a not unattractive, but not terribly attractive 6-foot-tall aluminum fence that wrapped around and was secure parking for CJE's buses. So this was a 400-foot kind of windswept, vacant, largely vacant stretch of Howard Street. And today it's a landscaped, active facade that contributes to the overall streetscape improvement along Howard Street. And by the way, the new tree grates and the trees and the paving that you see there, that was a City of Evanston project. And part of our challenge here was coordinating with not just City of Evanston, because Evanston was running the project, but the Chicago Department of Transportation and the Illinois Department of Transportation, who all had pieces of this. So part of our construction challenge was we had 2 different construction projects happening adjacent to this site at the same time. And again, this is a little bit of an expanded view. As you're walking down this street, this is now a vibrant, much denser, much more pedestrian-friendly corridor than it was before. This is the rear of the building, and again, and I'll come back to some images that show the back of this. We have our landscape architect here as well, Claire Kettlecamp. Her firm was the landscape architect of record for this project. And if you were a resident of this neighborhood, you know this was kind of weedy and overgrown, despite CJE's best efforts to keep it neat and tidy. And so now it is an area with growing plants and really a kind of a lovely planted design with vines that are going, making this literally a green wall on the back of the building. This, I think, is probably the nicest dumpster enclosure in all of Evanston. I would maybe argue anywhere in the Metro Chicago area. This was about a $100,000 undertaking. And that rolling gate that you see there conceals the dumpsters, and the trash trucks come down, they open the gate, and they take out the dumpsters, and they put them back in here. And again, we wanted to do this to be good neighbors, and I'll come back to the theme of being good neighbors repeatedly as I talk about this. I think one of the things that is important to understand here is there are pieces of this project that are still not finished. So this is one of them. And it's a little hard to see if you don't know exactly what you're looking for, but this area here, you can see there's a blue tape in here, and this looks like a service door at the back of a big box store. That's a temporary facade. That is going to be replaced, we hope, fingers crossed, starting next week. It was supposed to be finished 10 months ago, and this is the supply chain challenges that we're dealing with in the middle of COVID. There's also some very attractive decorative elements that we couldn't finish until that piece of the building is finished. So in the original rendering, and I'll zoom in a little bit so that you see this, there was a mural by an Evanston-based artist that was designed to wrap around from this face of the building around inside into the lobby of the building. And then this is an image of the kind of iconography that the artist was going to be working with in here. Again, we can't finish this until we get what's called a storefront system installed. And we can't get the storefront installed until we get the hardware that has been on order for 8 months in order to get this piece of the building done. So as part of our commitment to the community, we actually had the artist host a series of workshops to help build mosaics and use little beads and other shells and things like that to make sculptural elements that will then be attached to the face of the building once the artist is able to get in there and finish his work. So we had a series of workshops. I think Jenny Calero, our project manager, is here. I think there were 3 workshops that we had. I think this one was at Robert Crown to make these. And we really had really good community contributions to this project, which we're very much looking forward to sharing with the neighborhood. But again, we have to finish the building. The other thing I think it's important to note is what we ended up doing with the facade of the former CJE building. And I'll come back to a picture of this. In fact, I think, yeah, there it is. So if you remember, this is what it looked like previously. It was really in pretty rough shape. That was about 1965 board and batten siding that was attached to it. And the architects in the room will appreciate this. When we pulled that off, we realized that the only thing behind it was a 1960 cow wall backup system. So there's really nothing holding that wall up. And so we had a choice to make, and we didn't know that until we were actually able to open up the building and get in there and start fixing it. So we made a decision to invest in the public realm here and use a masonry facade instead of what is shown here on the original plan development rendering, which was a much cheaper kind of wood or wood composite system. And at the end of the day, we thought that this would be, A, more comfortable for our partners at CJE because we're better able to insulate that wall, and B, a better contribution to the public realm on Howard Street. So again, I'm going to come back to sort of the before and after pictures, or the vision and reality pictures, if you prefer. So there were 3 images that were contained in the plan development ordinance, and I think that is what the Evanston staff are referring to in looking to make their final approval. So this is what we actually built, looking east down Howard Street, and that's the rendering. This was another rendering from that set, and this is looking west down Howard Street. This is what we actually built. And so I think people, complain, well, this east wall of the building, it's blank. It's, why is it like that? Well, first of all, it's a party wall. It abuts another property. And so legally, we can't put windows into that wall because it is right up against the neighbor's property. And the expectation is that someday this little strip center at the corner, it's an important corner at Ridge and Howard Street, will be redeveloped, and some other building will be built up against the face of our building. So this is what the rendering showed, and again, this is what was actually built today. It's really hard to see substantial differences in those images. This is the alley view, looking east down the alley. That's between Howard and Dobson. And again, you see the concept of a fence, you see the concept of a green wall, you see the mass of the building. This is what was built today. And again, here is our $100,000 dumpster screen. There is a deck on the second level that's shared by residents of this building and by the clients for CJE. And so we have an elevator that allows us to kind of switch off and use that deck. This has wood siding that faces the neighbors, and then you can see all along the alley wall, it's green and it's planted with ivy that is climbing up the wall and will ultimately kind of conceal that entire rear facade. So here's one more, and this is what the alley looked like before. There I am. I'm there with my son, actually, because we live about 10 minutes away from here. About 2 weeks after we closed on the financing, we got some concerns or complaints from the neighbors saying, hey, that alley really looks like heck. There are weeds growing up there, and why don't you take care of it? And so we went out there. Jenny was out there too, and we cleaned it up. Even before we had any construction crews on the site, we certainly didn't have property management staff on the site because we thought that was an obligation that we had as developers. So I'm going to get a little bit more into the details now. I promise this won't take long. Just to give you a sense of the project schedule and the context that we were working in. So we made our initial presentations to DAPR, in November, December of 2019. I think there were 2 separate DAPR meetings, and I believe we came before this body, as it used to be called, the Plan Commission. It was either November or December of 2019. City Council approved the Plan Development Ordinance on December 18th, 2019, and then, as we all know, March 13th, 2020 was when the world started shutting down. It took us essentially another 7 months to get to a closing from there because it was challenging to work through the financial closing process in the middle of COVID, but we did it. And contractually, the original date that we had with our contractor when they were supposed to finish the building was October of 2021. We actually were able to first occupy the building in March of 2022. And again, as you've seen from the pictures, we're still not 100% done. I'd say we're 99.98% done. We've got that last little bit of entryway that we need to finish. But that is the world that we're living in today. Our initial construction budget, and if you've ever worked on an affordable housing project, you know that these budgets are fixed. Lots of pieces of these budgets are fixed, including our fee. We are paid a fee by the project to do this project. And so the original construction budget for this building was $18.1 million, assuming that we used 100% of the 5% contingency that we set aside in case of problems in the soil or unforeseen conditions or so on. Our final construction budget was $19 million, so $900,000 over what we had, including all of the contingency already being in there. So that means our entire fee after we started construction on this building is going back in to the construction to finish the building. We're not earning a dime on the completion of this building. But we have an obligation to our investors, we have an obligation to the city of Evanston, we have an obligation to the neighbors, and most importantly, we have an obligation to the residents of this building to finish it. And so we did it. But we had to make some changes. And so the changes that we made are what you see on the facade today, and that's why we're here. Supply chain delays, again, if you're in any industry that has to do with construction, you know that the typical delivery time for a storefront window system in the before times was something like 8 to 10 weeks. And that includes getting the hardware, electronic locks and things that you need, because typically the contractors won't just put it up on the site if they don't have all the pieces together. And so they have the storefront sticks and they have the glass. They've been waiting on literally the electronic locks that we need in order to secure this building. It's gone from 8 to 10 weeks to 8 to 10 months. The typical delivery time for decorative metal elements, and again, including the hardware, is something like 2 to 3 months. That time frame has doubled under COVID. In some critical aspects of the project, and we didn't run into this, but again, timelines now exceed a year to get some pieces of projects. And so I'm not making this up. You can talk to anybody who is in construction. I actually heard from City of Evanston staff that they ran into the same issues on city construction projects. So, we also had labor shortages. We had we did the best we could with our pandemic preparedness program. We didn't have any outbreaks on site, but we had this kind of consistent level of, he got sick and he's got to be out for 2 weeks, and, we couldn't get a full crew here, and so it slowed us down. And the subcontractors were continually seeking both time extensions and price increases in order to do that. And so the contracts that we had on this project were pieces of paper that were only nominally useful because it was an emergency, and everybody was like, look, we're doing the best we can here. The last thing that I want to come back to is our communication with the neighbors on this project. I sent out probably 24, maybe more, emails to a group of, you can see up here, there's a, where'd my laser go? Oh, the laser's died here. There's a list of about 70 residents that I got at the time from then Alderman Rainey, who were active members of either they lived on Dobson or they were other neighbors in the Oakton Historic District. And so I sent out lots of communication to them talking about potential noise, talking about vibration, because we had to do some work that vibrated the neighbors. And so, I recognized that that would be upsetting to them, and so we tried to at least keep them informed. I couldn't always not have the vibrations of the noise happen, but at least I tried to let them know about it ahead of time. And in response to those communications, I generally got pretty good feedback from the neighbors. This is some of the best communications I have ever seen from a developer to a neighborhood. Thank you for taking the time. Member of the Evanston staff. These updates to the residents help immensely. Much appreciated. Another staff member. I just wanted to drop you a note of thanks for the details you are providing to the neighborhood regarding the construction project at 999 Howard. I think there are lots of residents that are not used to pylons and foundations work driving that are needed for a new structure as you are all building. I know in your business you'll get complaints from time to time, but I just wanted to say that I appreciate the communication and the willingness to be sensitive to the neighborhood. That's one of the neighbors. And finally, first of all, I am glad that the Evergreen Group has the project at 999 1015 Howard. If I do say so, the crew is doing a bang-up job. Modern building erection is quick, and occupancy will be faster than anyone expected. Thank you for your efforts on this building project. It is a tremendous asset to our neighborhood. So, let me just pause there for 1 second and say that I think to the extent that there are any neighbors here today who are upset about this, I did not send out an email in advance of this. So the only notice that the neighborhood group got about this issue was the notice that got sent out from city staff relating to this hearing. I thought a lot about whether or not I should do it. And in hindsight, maybe I should have sent out communication on this. And maybe it didn't live up to the standard that I tried to set early on in the project. So to the extent that I think anything we did was maybe a mistake, I should have probably given the neighborhood a heads up about this issue in advance. And for that, I apologize, but I'm not sure how much else I could have or would have done differently on this project. So again, getting back to the meat of this issue, under the city ordinance 63612, there is a list of 6 things that are allowed to be minor adjustments under a plan development. So I could potentially move the building up to 25% of the distance shown between this and other buildings. Now, it's a zero lot line project, so that's irrelevant here. But, I could move the building around on the site and get the staff to approve it as a minor adjustment. I could change circulation elements, the entrances to the building, the 2 driveways that we have off of Howard Street, and that would be considered a minor adjustment. Any of the open space on the project, any of the landscape elements, changing the grade of the building, or the location and type of utility equipment. We have a transformer off the alley. It's contained within a concrete structure. I could have changed all that, and it would have been considered a minor amendment. But down at the bottom it says, any adjustment to the approved development plan not authorized by those 6 things there is considered to be a major adjustment. So here we are today, and I'm asking you to approve this adjustment, which I consider, just in plain language, not according to the ordinance language, but in plain language, not to be a major adjustment to this project, but a minor visual adjustment that we had to make in order to finish this project in an incredibly challenging, difficult time for the entire construction and development industry. Without the certificate of occupancy, I cannot complete my process with my investor, and this project will have immense financial problems. So I thank you for your attention, and I'm open to questions now.
Thank you, Mr. Block. Any questions from commissioners?
I do have one. Mr. Block, when you decided that you would need to make those facade adjustments, when exactly was that in your construction schedule, and when did you notify the city that you needed to make that adjustment?
We probably made that decision, I would say, end of 2021. And we didn't actually notify the city because, again, at the time, we considered it to be a minor adjustment to the building that was purely aesthetic elements. It has nothing to do with the function of the building. It was purely decorative. And in our view, it was consistent with the original design that we had shown.
Understood on that. On the other hand, it was part of the original development package that had been approved by the city, so they had an expectation of what would be there. So I'm kind of curious as to why nobody thought, well, we've had a difficult run, and I agree with you, the schedules and the delivery and the labor shortages over COVID have been terrible. So I fully understand that, but it seems to me that keeping the city informed is something you would have wanted to do to avoid, these kinds of pressures, let's say.
Yeah, and again, in hindsight, perhaps I should have done that. We had inspectors from different departments of the city visiting the site on a regular basis, and frankly, I was worried about and concerned about making sure that my plumbing didn't freeze and that I could actually deliver a functioning electrical system to the building during construction. And so, again, if it was an oversight, I take responsibility for that. But there are hundreds, if not thousands, of decisions that we have to make in the construction of a building like this, and this was part of that process.
I think that you put us in a, unfortunately, we're in a situation where.
Your mic's not working. Your mic's not working.
Yeah. Unfortunately, you've put us in a situation where what are we going to do? The building's built. And personally, I think that the aesthetics of this design, this new design, are as good as the previous one. That's just personally. But my question for you, because I think what the question for us is, what do we do in the future to prevent this? Because even though I think that, hey, these are acceptable alternatives, some developer may make other changes that he fails to tell the city that are not acceptable. And then he comes to us, he or she, comes to us with a design that is not acceptable, but is built. So what do we do? So my question to you is, what should we do to prevent that from happening again?
Well, my view is that your code forces this conversation, right? And so I guess my response back to you is that you all have an obligation to evaluate whether the story that I am telling or the story that any other developer who comes before you with a similar set of circumstances makes sense, right? And so whether we, in the course of building an affordable housing building, had to make some sacrifices during a time of massive social disruption, whether that rises to the standard of allowing exceptions, and if somebody comes before you with a similar story, because I'll tell you right now, we have written into our construction contracts for all of the new projects, so my contract with a contractor that we didn't have in this project because it was still pretty new, a clause that says COVID is no excuse, right? And so we know about supply chain disruptions, and so that is part of the challenge now that's out there in the world. But at the time we were working on this, it was still too new. So I think that again, it's up to you to determine whether other developers do this, and I would argue that we did this in good faith. Did we communicate as fully and proactively as we could have? Maybe not. But we made these changes in good faith so we could finish this building, and I think that's the test. Did other projects make changes in good faith to deliver a building that is appropriate for the public realm in Evanston?
But the issue is communication. That is the issue. And again, back to my example, if there is no communication and yet the solution was not made in good faith, what do we do? I mean, this is I don't know in the future if this happens again, or how do we prevent this from happening again? That's the issue. I really don't know.
I'm not sure.
I mean, I just wonder if there's an interim review that zoning needs to do, because zoning coming in before you get final permit, what's that going to do? Maybe there should be an interim review. Maybe, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I personally think that I don't understand those standards because they don't specifically call out facade. But I remember this project very distinctly when you came in. And the conversation about the facade was a big one. It was, and everyone was so happy with it and, you know, all that. So, I don't know. I'm looking to everyone here for suggestions.
I know later in our proceeding, we're expecting a motion to try to study the language around these minor adjustments to try to hopefully capture this a little better, just as an FYI. I have a question, just to clarify, on the wood paneling that you forgo. Was it an issue of lead times or price, or both? Can you clarify that?
Both. We were hearing it was 6 to 8 months to get the materials we needed, and it was about $300,000 to build those facade elements. And again, we were already $1 million, close to $1 million over where we were with our contingency already spent.
And did you consider waiting in order to go back and complete it later? Because I'm not sure that the external aesthetic paneling would waiting on that would have held up occupancy?
Well, so and that's an issue and a question. And the way these projects work is we have an investor in this project who is a bank, and one of the very specific requirements from that bank is I need a final certificate of occupancy from the city. And if there is a condition attached to that final certificate of occupancy, like building these panels later, for example, they will require us to put up that money. And we have no more money to put up at this point. We've spent all of our fee on this project in order to do this. And so they won't essentially close out this project, and it puts the whole project, frankly, at risk of litigation in order to do that. And so that's what we were most concerned about.
I have a quick question. All these revisions, were they approved by your architect and submitted to the city as revisions or not?
No, they were designed by the architect, but again, we believe them to be minor changes that didn't require any subsequent city approval. Again, that was a judgment. Was it a mistake? I'm not sure.
I'm just curious, during inspections, what kind of, let's call it, paper documents did you show to the inspectors? Revised drawings or original permit drawings?
Again, the inspectors who come out during a construction process are not looking visually at the building. They're looking at the life safety issues. They're looking at plumbing and electrical and so forth. And so now we're in this situation, to George's point, we're in this situation because the only visual review happens at the very end of the project.
Thank you.
Now, if I can chime in, as an architect, I understand your position. And basically, just so everybody else can understand it as well, it's like if you are going to build your house and you decide to put up siding, and that's what you showed on your drawings, and you went with wood siding. At the end of the day, they didn't have the wood siding that you were looking for, so now you put in vinyl siding. Would that change the look? Would that change the structure? Would that change? But if you can't finish up with your now vinyl siding and you can't close up your windows and seal them and have protection against the elements, then it's just a decorative feature. That's all I have to say.
Any further questions from commissioners? Okay, hearing no further questions from us, we'll now move on to public comment. I have a list here. I assume everybody who signed up here is signed up to speak on this case. If I read your name and I'm wrong, just let me know. Okay, so I will call up people in order of who signed up, and when you come up to the lectern, please state your name and address for the record. The first is Carol Williams. Passing, okay. Stephen Loam.
Stephen Loam, 7549 North Oakley in Chicago, right across the street from the development site. Actually, when I signed that paper, I didn't realize I was signing to speak, but since I do have the opportunity, I'd just like to ask a question. I do look at it every day. I compared it to the original elevation. I think the original elevation is far more attractive. I understand the problems. I understand why the developer made the choices that he did. I'm just wondering if there is a possibility that some additional funds could be made available to improve the elevation of the building.
Thank you. Dan and Ann Van Hoekelen, also passing, okay. Claire Kettlekamp.
I'm also the landscape architect on this project. And I think one thing that I wish David had mentioned is that the reason we were asked to get involved is that they were trying to figure out the best way to do a living facade. Their partner in this program or project was Center for Jewish Elderly. And they wanted to keep this Tree of Life mosaic. It was very important to them. It sort of tied into their mission statement. So really from my involvement with the project, the thrust of the facade was that it was to be a living green facade to celebrate their partnership with the Center for the Jewish Elderly. So from that standpoint, I know that early on in the process, people weren't maybe as enamored with the precast concrete panels, but they're the perfect vehicle to support these vines. And the project was planted in early June, and we've got coverage. Many of the vines are reaching the wall in the alley. So I don't know of any developer also that has ever asked us to take as much care on the alley facade with a landscape project as they do on the front facade of a building. So as a benefactor of this project, it's a wonderful buffer from us, our neighborhood, and Howard Street. And the team has been wonderful to work with, and I think they've been very conscientious, and I feel that this is a hiccup in our ordinance, and I hope that it gets worked out and the project gets approved. So, thank you.
Thank you. Ann Rainey.
Thank you very much. I want to speak to the issue of this happening again. I don't think it's going to happen again because one of the points that staff makes is this shouldn't have happened this time. And that I think the effort is going to be made is to speak to the council and talk about why this kind of a change should be a minor adjustment and not a major adjustment. And therefore, it probably will never happen again. If this were not a planned development, this definitely would be a minor variation. And so it would not be such a, such an issue. I want to say that I have spoken to about, I would say 10 people today, asking them, they had no idea about this meeting, and asking them, and they don't live in the neighborhood, asking them what they think about this building. And the sense that I got from them is that it was bright and shiny, that it was very industrial, which is the kind of architecture that they like, that it seemed very modern, and that it was kind of thing that they would like to see on Howard Street. And as a matter of fact, many people referenced the ugly shopping center on the corner and hoped that it would be renovated in response to this building. And they loved it. And it is a new and exciting thing. So I don't actually think design is necessarily a land use issue, and no land use issue really is an issue here. I mean, they didn't make it taller, they didn't make it, it's not a different building, it's exactly the same building. And, you know, we all know that design is really a taste matter. And so I really hope that you will approve the adjustment, the major adjustment. I hope you will. I hope you will. And hopefully the council will also. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me hard with this. Louis Huey? Forgive me.
No, my apologies for my handwriting. Lois Hedman, I live at 1100 Dobson. And I'm really glad I came tonight because I learned a lot. And I wish I had known that before. So it speaks to the communication. Because, you know, you get something in the mail and it talks about a major adjustment and, you know, you get concerned because I'm almost directly behind this development. So I think communication with the neighborhood, given the level that it had been at, this would, you know, this was a real break in that communication. It was a change, and it was upsetting to get this. Because quite frankly, I kind of agree that if you can move the building 25 feet, and that's not major, but this is, that kind of doesn't make sense from, you know, the city standpoint. But again, I think communication would have just, I wouldn't be here if we'd gotten that communication. The second thing is that I'm glad the building is finished. I'm glad that people are moving in. I think that what they did with the original CJE building, because we just took a walk by and were able to look at it very closely, and I really, really like what they did there. And again, personal opinion, but those yellow window boxes, just, I saw those when they first went up and I kept waiting for them to get finished. And I realize it's a matter of taste, but I've lived in this neighborhood for 30 years, and I get defensive about how Howard Street is treated by the city, by standards. It's like, it's Howard Street, whatever. It's okay. It doesn't need to be at a high standard. So I come from with a biased viewpoint. I'll admit that. But you know, the people that are living there, they deserve a really nice looking building. I love the growing elements up the facade. I didn't know about the alley ones, but that just sounds wonderful. And I also worry about, will the plants survive? You know, because they look great now, they're growing now, but are there funds and people who will be able to care for them to keep them thriving, so that will remain a really great element to the building. So I was also wondering about, you know, could there be a delay and, you know, maybe do something, but after hearing the presentation, I realized that's not really feasible. Like I said, I understand the problems with COVID, with all the delays, with all of that, and the cost overruns. You know, that seems entirely consistent with much of what all of us have been dealing with. So I do appreciate that, and so I you know, I don't really have standing to say turn this down. You know, it's the worst thing in the world. So I think I'm more in some ways talking to the city to say, you know, make sure stuff can't get through that you know, shouldn't. Because some things that happen in Evanston, I just look at and like, yikes, how did that get built? And so I guess more of my concern is directed towards you. So anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you. Devon Reed?
Hi, I just want to say thank you all for this hearing. Thank you for the great presentation. You know, I've had a lot of residents reach out with some concerns, and I think that a lot of those concerns will be addressed when folks get an opportunity to see the presentation here. So I'm really, again, thankful to David for that presentation. I have an answer to your question. I do think it's important that we look at this at a case-by-case basis, and we don't make a move necessarily to change this from a major variation to a minor variation that wouldn't have either the council or some committee come back and look at this. Because I can imagine a world where there's a large downtown development and the developer promises one thing and then comes back to the community with a very different facade. And we want to make sure that we can hold folks accountable to what they promised the community. Particularly, again, in this case, I'm fine moving forward here, and I think a number of the community members will be, but particularly when the city invests millions of dollars into a project, I believe that what you promised is what you need to provide. Or you need to be very careful about what promises you're making up front and make sure that you have the ability to deliver. I will say that, you know, I've had the opportunity, I ride my bike past the building. You know, the building is beautiful. I'm really excited that the artist, Piloto is the gentleman's name, who I'm working with on another project, and Piloto is working on the mural, and really excited to see that, really excited to see the doorway done. I've had the opportunity to briefly speak with neighbors or with folks who live in the building as I'm riding past or walking past. I've seen the beautiful alley. Really excited about this. Looking forward to this moving forward. But I really think in the grand scheme we should be really having a conversation about how to ensure that this doesn't happen in the future. And I think in the minutes here, if this does pass, it should be very clear. So if another developer comes back and is looking at this, that they don't think that they can get away with promising us one thing and not delivering on that. And I think it should be very clear if this moves forward that it's based on this particular case, based on the fact that, you know, this is a nonprofit developer, based on the fact that this is senior housing, and based on the fact that this committee, if it so chooses, sees this as not a major deviation from what was planned. And, you know, I think it's relevant to include the information regarding the impacts of COVID, because hopefully we're not going to experience another pandemic in the next few years that has the supply chain disruptions that have occurred with this project. So thank you all for the time.
Thank you. Sue Lolabach?
Good evening, everybody. I'm Sue Lolbach with Connections for the Homeless. And to speak to the zoning issue, I think it is a little bit weird that the zoning, the standards sort of say, okay, these 5 or 7 things are minor variations and everything else is major. It almost seems like that should be flipped. You know, what are the major ones that you have to come to us for? Everything else, you know, go for it. Our feeling is that the zoning code really needs to allow flexibility, particularly right now, to allow people to build affordably. And, you know, in terms of this specific development, I'd say given that almost everything else stopped during the pandemic, it is pretty amazing that this apartment building got built. And now that things may be stabilizing with the pandemic, it's wonderful that this building is ready, because things have not stabilized with housing costs. Rental costs are now soaring across the country and in Evanston. The case managers and clients at Connections for the Homeless are seeing this, And the National Low Income Housing Coalition recently cited that for every $100 increase in average rent in the community, the rate of homelessness increases by 9%. So that means that the Anne Rainey apartments and others like them are more urgently needed in our community than ever. And if zoning and zone decisions at bodies like this can support that, that's really important. We would like to see the city support these final steps for the project as flexibly, expeditiously, and economically as possible. This is a mission-driven project, and we ask the city to allow Evergreen to wrap this up without further expense so that they can move on to creating more affordable housing throughout the region. I'd also like to just read a couple of notes from Bonnie Wilson, who is part of our coalition joining forces for affordable housing. She could not be here tonight, but just sent me a quick note saying she drove by the Anne Rainey apartments. It's now a cheerful yellow. She was very impressed on the beautiful and cheerful facade, and she is hoping that the city won't do anything to cost this developer more money when the new residents will look forward to coming home to a cheerful home. This developer has worked hard to make sure this development is affordable for everyone. Why cost him more money for something that does not need to be changed? Thank you.
Thank you. Wake Brenna, forgive me.
Warren Brenner.
There we go.
Yes, hi. I'm living at Anne Rainey. I thank God every day for being there. I needed it financially, and on top of it, it's brand new, so I consider myself very lucky. And also, because this is something that will happen in the future with the corner strip mall, the only problem I have with it is I have to keep my windows. I have a northern exposure, and I have to keep my windows closed all day because of the terrible stink that comes from the restaurants, from the fryers. There's always an east wind coming off of the lake, or a west wind, or it's off of the lake, and that's just a situation with that. So other than that, I don't have any problem with the strip mall. So if that's going to be gone, I think they're not going to do it to put a McDonald's or Wendy's in the whole corner. So other than that, I'm glad I came, and thank you for the hearing. And I wish the best for the developer also, which and also I've cruised the alley. I've checked out, scoped the whole place out, and it looks fantastic. It's everything they did there. And I've worked that $100,000 thing when I didn't even know it was open right around it. Who knows? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, that's the end of public comment. I want to ask staff, do you have anything to say or present?
I'm not sure if the mic is working. I'm happy to answer any questions if you have. I think we've, the proposal's been provided by the applicant here tonight, so you have a full understanding of what they're requesting. From our perspective, we understand the challenges that they've encountered during the process, and we're supportive of their request moving forward. We also recognize that the code on major and minor variations does present some challenges. So open to feedback or looking at that in the future. So again, happy to answer any questions if you have them.
Do you agree with the characterization that you were forced kind of into this path by the restrictions of the code?
I think our memo, does say that we understand that our code, is very limiting. Anything that's not listed shall be considered a major amendment, and that's, a shall is a pretty strong word when it comes to zoning. So there are 6 elements that are, listed there as minor amendments. Changes to facade is not one of them. So that's where, we felt that it wasn't in our discretion to view it as a minor amendment because the code does not specifically list it as such.
You said in your memo, however, the building elevations as constructed do not substantially comply with the approved building elevations, particularly the facade. Is there anything other than the facade that you feel is in this category, in particular, is part of this major adjustment? Do you have to define it as such, or is it really just the facade?
It's just the facade, yeah.
Okay.
I don't think that they have asked for any other adjustments to their approved plan at this point.
Okay. Any other questions? All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Does the applicant have anything they want to close with or respond to?
No, only, again, thank you for the opportunity to come chat, and I appreciate in particular Alderman Reed being here tonight and Lois Hedman being here tonight. I extended an offer to Alderman Reed to take a tour of the building, and I extend that same offer to, the neighbors who may not have seen inside. It's really pretty beautiful inside, and the units are bright and sunny with high ceilings and a lot of light. Again, the lesson that I take away from this is that if I start with a high standard of communication on a project, I need to continue that and not let whatever is worrying me about a project get in the way of maintaining that good communication with the neighborhood. So again, my regrets and apologies on that, and I think there's just a process lesson in here for me. So.
All right, thank you. With that, I will close the record and move on to commission deliberation. What are people's thoughts? Good.
I just want to say that I have no problem with the revised projects, and I know Evergreen, and I know they do great projects, and so and this one is one of those, I believe. I want to comment on Alderman Rainey's comment that we don't, aesthetics are not our purview. That is true, but what is our purview is ensuring that what the developer says he or she is going to do, that is done. And that's what we're talking about here. And that's what I think when we talk about the future, that's what we need to focus on. And the last thing was someone made the comment about the fact that our standards list the minor comments and then everything else is major. That is, to me, the absolute reverse of what it should be. And it should be very specific, too, because you don't want to get into these arguments. We don't want to see this situation happen again. So I think there's work to be done on those standards.
I have a comment. I'm sorry. Do I interrupt? Sorry about that.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay, so I will go with what Commissioner Halleck said. I'm okay with the project and with the changes, so that's a yes. But I would comment on two things. First, these things should not happen if along the way of revision to a project, the revisions were approved or disapproved or put in front of us during the process, so that we can have some vote really on what could be done on this building. This currently it's a done deal. The good thing is that it is done well. But if we want to prevent these things from happen, the standard way of submittals, revisions, and going in front of the land use committee should be followed. The second thing, as somebody mentioned, if there are funds in the future for bringing the facade a little bit better to what it was suggested the first time, personally, I like the first rendering better. But that's my opinion, and I will leave to the architect of the project to follow up if there are any possible changes for the facade. This is my opinion. Once again, I'll vote yes. Thank you.
So I agree. This is an important project for the city, and no one wants to punish anyone who's had some issues. I will only say that I don't think this is a quirk in the code. I don't think it's about the code itself. I think it's about accountability. Whatever issues we have with the way the code lists major or minor variations, it was very clear that there were documents that spelled out and showed what that elevation should be like. I can understand all the problems with COVID, with conditions, with labor shortages, but those things happen all the time also with construction projects in general. And my concern and my recommendation to the city is that we look at ways to hold developers accountable for delivering what has been said, so that we don't run into this. And I don't think this is a problem with the code or the city, and I think the applicant has already addressed this. This was a major lapse in communication, and no one is suggesting that we do something to the project, but I think it's important that that accountability be carried through for every developer that works in the city on every project, or we'll have some issues in the future.
I guess I'll go next. Again, I think that, this project at this point is substantially complete, so I think going back and somehow punishing the developer is not going to be, effective or desirable, especially when we're building affordable housing. However, I'd like to point out that aesthetics and the design of a building and what's approved is really important. We have plan developments all the time that show, building so many stories, certain kinds of materials. We have plan development design guidelines that talk about what is and isn't acceptable, and they are guidelines. But I think that it's really important that we make sure that, maybe we need to have interim inspections by the zoning folks, or if not inspections, at least interim meetings where the developer meets with staff to say, hey, we had, issues with, well, COVID is a prime example. I mean, you've the supply chain issues, the getting materials, and just the cost of the materials. But it's important to keep the city informed as to what's going on, so that if adjustments have to be made, there can be a public process where things are worked out. And I don't think that facade materials should necessarily be a minor adjustment. I mean, I think that the aesthetics of buildings are really important, and that's that's one of the reasons, years ago that some of the larger projects were required to be plan development so that there weren't surprises with respect to what developments looked like. Because as I think we all know in town, there's some things you're wondering, how in the world did that get built? And in many cases, it was because it complied with the zoning. So there was, no one could say, no, this is not appropriate. So, again, I think in this particular instance, I will support the major adjustment, but I think that we really ought to be very careful about making changes to the zoning. I think that trying to come up with some sort of, maybe in each plan development approval, maybe there needs to be a clause or a condition saying that, just making it very clear that changes to the facade have to be, brought to the city for approval. Even if it's staff approval, and they can say, no, this is not anything close to what what your plan development agreed to. So I don't know that it necessarily needs to come to back to the Land Use Commission or the City Council every time, but there needs to be built in an interim step so that this doesn't, is less likely to happen again.
Anybody else?
I'd also like to share some of the views that made in terms of the great project. I will vote yes and support it. I am scratching my head a bit from the developer's perspective that if the code is as clear as it is, and if it's not one of these 6, it's a major, and it wasn't one of the 6 on the basis on which there's a feeling this was actually a minor. And it may be from an architectural perspective, maybe from a developer construction perspective, but from the perspective of the code, it was pretty straightforward. It's a major change. So given how well organized you are, and I'm a bit surprised that one kind of fell through the cracks, since on its face it's a major adjustment. And I completely agree with the fact that we need some sort of interim process here, because right now we're faced with a fait accompli. And that's what we don't want to be in a position where there's really not, buildings, being occupied without a final certificate, the investor goes ballistic. And so as we think through this process, I'm not sure we actually have to change the code. I agree with Commissioner Linwell, but there needs to be, in my view, an interim process to make sure we're not faced with this situation with our backs against the wall. But I would be interested in how you guys let this thing fall through the cracks, because it's pretty straightforward on this.
I apologize, but the record is closed. We would have to move to open it again.
I do also intend to vote yes for this. I just, I am sympathetic to the challenges of cost, financing, supply chain, labor delays for this project for the pandemic. But there are challenges with cost, labor, financing, delays, supply chain for all projects. And the pandemic was an extraordinary situation, but part of our charge is to have a responsibility to hold the developers accountable for these planned unit developments. So that's why, but the building's built. It seems to satisfy, it seems that the community is happy with it. They would have been more happy with it as if it was realized in the way that it was proposed. So I guess mine will be a vote, but with reservation and concern about knock-on effects or a precedent for future developers and future projects. So it's not an easy situation, but I do intend to vote yes.
I also intend to vote yes. Once again, maybe a lot of people are not familiar with how the permitting process goes. When somebody comes out to a zoning meeting or land use meeting, that's the conceptual, the beginning of an actual project. It's not the final project. Once you take it from the concept that was presented in zoning or here at the land use, then it goes through the actual permitting process, construction process. So you have to go through making sure that life safety, structural, electrical, plumbing, everything else has to be taken into account. You submit your permit drawings to the city. The city has approved them. At that time, if there were any changes to the actual structure, if there was movement of window, entries we said it was going to be on the left-hand side or on the west side, now it's on the east side. Those would be major changes to a project. The final color of the project, that should not, and it actually should not be represented because it's still, once again, it's visual. Unless you're, changing it and that's a simple solution, because then you talk directly to your developer and say, hey, whoa, stop. I don't want it being painted purple with butterflies. That's not what we agreed upon. But if I can get a solid color, we're going to be okay with it.
I think if David were allowed to step up here, he would say that I would guess that they submitted the original design for a building permit, correct? Okay. I think because the issue is what happens after that. That's not, and I suspect that, when a project goes through construction, and I know the process, your pricing comes in and all kinds of things, and you deal with deliveries and all of those things, which is what is caused this, it sounds like. And there isn't any mechanism or regular communication after building permit. That seems to be the issue for me.
But there never is. In any project, if you want to build your house, You will get a design, you will get a drawing from your architect and say, this is the concept, this is what you wanted. And then you basically go in, you put all your stuff in for permitting, you go through the process of permitting, then you go through the process of bidding.
Yeah,
And then there are changes to that, and in your budget, that's when you decide this can stay, this cannot stay.
Is zoning review part of the building process, building permit process? Well, it should be. It should be.
The question is there a zoning inspection during the construction phase?
Building permit process, when you submit the drawings for building permit.
Yep.
Does zoning also review that?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
Yes.
But they review the changes in, as far as I know, the changes as to the variations that are listed, correct? Or do you actually,
We review what was approved as part of the plan development review process through Land Use Commission and the City Council. So we take a look and make sure, number one, that they're still meeting code requirements for their site, design. And then we have to review it for substantial compliance with the original approval through City Council and you all. So we would look at the facades at that time to make sure that they were consistent with what was approved. So that is part of the review before the building permit is actually issued. My understanding is that the changes occurred after the building permit was issued on the developer's end.
And they were not submitted as a revision.
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay. My comment, I'm in favor of granting the adjustment. I also work in construction, and I can also confirm that lead times, price fluctuations, in particular with wood products, have been highly volatile during the pandemic. I also have no reason to believe that the developer has not acted in good faith. And I think that the change to the facade is, one, it's not egregious, and if anything, it also increases the total amount of window area, which one could consider to be a good thing. So I'm in favor. If there are no more comments, which I don't believe there are, we can move to reviewing the standards for approval. Megan, are you able to put something up? So there's a wide variety of sets of standards, and in this case, I don't believe anyone is actually saying that any standard is not met. So I'm not going to go through every single one unless anyone wants to argue that something up here that we're showing isn't met. Can we go through those? Or just kind of slowly present them?
Yes, so I've got each of the code sections where there are standards. You can point out which of those standards you think actually apply and discuss that, and we can go through each of the ones that
Well, these are publicly available, and they're listed out in the packet.
Yes.
My point is that I don't think we need to go through each one individually, because no one is arguing that any of these is not met. We're here for a different procedural purpose. So with that, I'll ask for a motion from a commissioner.
I move that we accept the applicant's revised design as presented.
I'll second.
Okay, Megan, can you call the? Miss something?
we have to wait for,
Can I
Commissioner Lynn.
add something? There have been several suggestions made as to what can be done in the future, and this goes to city council, doesn't it?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so I don't know that we want to review everything, but it's all been said. Maybe all those comments, all those suggestions could be attached to our approval?
Yeah, everything that was discussed will absolutely be a part of the minutes. And there's been internal discussion about the process as well.
Okay.
So this is something that is absolutely going to be looked at.
Okay. Now that we're back at full strength, let's Oh, let's repeat the motion so you can hear it.
I move that we approve the developer's revised design as presented.
I know a second. Okay. Can we call the roll now?
Commissioner Aravallo?
Yes.
Commissioner Halleck?
Yes.
Commissioner Westerberg?
Yes.
Commissioner Marinchev?
Yes.
Commissioner Johnson?
Yes.
Commissioner Lindwall?
Yes.
Commissioner Hugo?
Yes.
And Acting Chair Pactel?
Yes. All right, I think that passes. Congratulations, and city staff will follow up for next steps. With that, we'll move on to the next case, and, oh, well.
Thank you, Commissioner Pactel, for acting. Before we move on to the next case, I've been in discussions with staff about what to do moving forward. I'm sorry I couldn't participate in that conversation, but since I had recused myself, I was not able to address the board at that particular time. So at this particular time, before I hand the chair, or before I take the chair back, I'd like to make a motion to city staff to ask them to review how we classify major and minor adjustments to plan developments. In particular, looking at when we grant site allowances for plan developments, my recommendation would be that we look at using those as our standards for major, and everything outside of that be a minor, which be addressed through the following process of having staff review it, and then forwarding that on to planning and development and city council for final approval. So there will be an opportunity for the public to have input, but it won't come before this board. But it would be addressed at the city council and city council committee level. So that is my motion. Is there a second? You need to ask if there's a second.
Second.
Are you seconding?
Yes.
I don't know who's chairing right now.
I'm handing it back to you.
So, all right. So there's a motion with a second. So I'll open the floor for discussion.
Chair Rogers, I do have a question.
Yep.
Are you suggesting that are you recommending that any change in the code as to what is major or minor not come in front of this committee, or this commission, but go to the city council? Is that correct?
So the actual change in the ordinance would follow the usual procedure, where we would conduct the hearing on whether this is the zoning change, or a zoning change, or a change to the zoning ordinance that is appropriate. And we would have discussion on that with input from staff as well as input from any citizens, developers, anybody else who wants to come and address the board at that particular time. The differentiation between the major and minor is that once we create those two categories, the major variations, which in my opinion should be anything that we've granted under site allowances, be addressed through us, everything else be addressed through staff, P&D, and city council.
Understood, thanks.
Okay. Well, I think that having staff come back and doing the public hearing is, I'm supportive of that. However, I think it's really important that significant changes to the facade and even the materials, there should be some discussion about whether or not that actually really is a major, that's something that should be addressed.
The one thing that we are granted, like any major variation that is issued, can be appealed to this board.
Right.
So I would trust staff to use their best judgment in terms of whether things should be moved forward, denied, and brought before this board or not.
But can staff appeal? I mean, they're making the decision.
They're making the decision, and I think staff will err on the side of kicking things up to us as a board as opposed to erring on the side of.
Yeah, okay. I just think that in addition to the whatever approvals recommendation we make on the site development allowances, I think we ought to see if there's some way that if there are really significant changes in the materials and the facade that, I mean, it could have affected whether or not we'd support the recommendation in the first place.
Right, and like I said, I have full faith in staff to make their best judgment and to err on the side of kicking things to this commission, which is typically the way they work with a lot of their minor variations, or at least have in the past.
Thank you.
Any other comments, suggestions? Hearing none, there's been a motion and it's been seconded to ask staff to review this. Does staff need any additional clarification input from us?
Not at this time. I think we'll
have a dialogue.
Yep. It'll come back before this body if there's any changes to the code for
Okay.
your review.
All right, thank you. With that, I will ask for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? With 9 in favor and 0 against, staff now has their direction from this board. And with that, we will move on to the next item on our agenda, which is 22 PLND 0055, a text amendment regarding restaurants in mixed-use districts. Ms. Klotz, I believe you're handling that?
Thank you, Chair Rogers. This is for a city-initiated text amendment to the zoning ordinance, Title VI of the City Code, to add restaurant type 1 as a permitted use and restaurant type 2 as an administrative review use in the MXE Mixed-Use Employment District. The Land Use Commission makes a recommendation to the City Council, the determining body for this case, in accordance with Section 634 of the Evanston Zoning Code and Ordinance 92021. This request came about via a referral from Councilmember Burns, and at the request of the existing caterer Soul and Smoke that is within Evanston. That business is located within the MXE zoning district and would like to expand from catering to a full-service type 1 restaurant. And looking at that specific area, it makes perfect sense. There is a craft brewery in the same vicinity that, for all intents and purposes, looks like and acts like a restaurant, although zoning classifies it as a craft brewery. So it is extremely logical to extend restaurants into the MXE district. Overall, there are 5 different areas throughout Evanston that have some MXE zoning. MXE zoning is, it largely started out in areas that were industrial and slowly transitioning to commercial and retail uses. That was around 2007. So at this point, those areas have successfully transitioned and now have a mixture of quasi-industrial, commercial, and residential uses. And with that mixture, there now is that demand for restaurant uses. So given all of that, staff recommends that type 1 restaurants follow other similar zoning district regulations and be a permitted use, and type 2 restaurants or quick serve restaurants also follow other existing zoning regulations as an administrative review use, which then has the option for staff to approve, deny, or defer to the special use process. Since this request came up, staff has been made aware of one other business in the MXE that is currently considered light manufacturing but would like to transition to be a likely type 2 restaurant. That is Kombucha Brava, which is in a different MXE area, but just to further show that there is decent interest in this.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the commission for Ms. Klotz? Commissioner Westerberg?
Any responses or questions from residents in some of these specific locations?
I'm sorry, what?
Are there any responses or questions or concerns from residents in these specific locations?
Staff has not received any comments regarding this.
Any other comments, questions? General feelings?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good idea. I mean, the MXE and I think the MUE is the other kind of mixed-use district that, frankly, even going back to the original zoning ordinance, they were established because these were areas that they were hodgepodge and nobody knew quite what to do with them. So, these mixed-use categories were created and in part, I think, to allow them to evolve over time. So I'm supportive of this request. I think that it makes perfect sense. And as you noted in your memo, uses have been added along the way to this district as it evolves. And I think that having, handling the evolution through the various text amendments, provides both some safeguards and flexibility. So I'm supportive.
Yeah, I'm supportive too. I was just going to say, I think restaurants stabilize these areas. I've been to Double Clutch several times, and I always see the Soul and Smoke truck, and I'm thinking, okay, where's the restaurant? It's not there.
They have a lovely carryout window. I've been there numerous times.
With that being said, I think that our mixed-use districts really kind of should be our catch-alls, and there should be things like industrial use, obviously, where you're working with heavy metals or things like that, we need to really kind of regulate. But outside of that, the mixed-use districts really should be kind of a catch-all that can include restaurants, retail, housing, residential, that sort of stuff all should be acceptable in those particular areas. We don't have a ton of space in the city that actually is designated under this zoning code or under this zoning district, so I have no problem with it either. These kind of seem like they're kind of either business commercial plus districts or something along those lines. I don't believe we have anyone left here to speak on the matter. The room has gotten very empty. So with that, we do have the standards that we have to meet. Can you bring those up, because I don't have these in front of me. So we have, just the four? Yes. Right, that's what I thought. We have these four standards under section 6345 of the zoning code. And the first one is whether the proposed amendment is consistent with the goals, objectives, and policies of the comprehensive general plan as adopted and amended from time to time by the city council. One of the things that our comprehensive plan does is it looks at making use of our districts in the best way that it can. And so prohibiting certain things that are really not going to increase demand upon a particular district doesn't seem to make sense. So I feel that that standard has been met. B, whether the proposed amendment is compatible with the overall character of existing development in the immediate vicinity of the subject property. Again, going back to the fact that these mixed-use areas are kind of a catch-all is how they were designed, so that it could include all those kind of stray uses that kind of wandered into each other in certain parts of the city. I believe that that standard has been met. Whether the proposed amendment will have an adverse effect on the value of adjacent properties. Again, with these being kind of our mixed-use areas where you can have retail next to housing, next to storefronts of various different types, I don't believe that in looking through what is permitted either as a special use or a permitted use in these areas, that adding a restaurant into that list is really going to drastically affect any of these properties in terms of their value. And number 4, the adequacy of public facilities and services. Again, that's going to kind of be based on a case-by-case matter as we look at restaurants, like it is with any either permitted or special use. And so I believe that that standard is also met. Is everyone in agreement with my findings on standards? With that, I will ask if there is a motion.
Yes, I will move that we recommend approval of a text amendment to add restaurant type 1 as permitted use and restaurant type 2 as an administrative review use in the MXE mixed-use employment district.
Thank you. Moved by Commissioner Lindwall. Is there a second? Commissioner Puchtal with the second. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none. Would you please call the roll?
Commissioner Aravallo?
Yes.
Commissioner Halleck? Yes. Commissioner Westerberg?
Yes.
Commissioner Merdinchev?
Yes.
Commissioner Johnson? Yes. Commissioner Lindwall?
Yes.
Commissioner Hugo?
Yes.
Commissioner Puchtel?
Yes.
And Chair Rogers?
Yes. So with 9 votes in favor and 0 against, the recommendation advances to P&D and then onward to City Council. That completes the items that we had on the agenda for this evening and moves us into communication. Does staff have anything that they would like to communicate? If not, I would like to say welcome to Ms. Flax in her new role as our interim community development director. She will also be retaining her role as our, and I wrote it down and I forgot to bring it, housing and grants administrator, manager. Okay. So welcome to her. And we've seen her before this board many other times in a different role, but she will be stepping into this one. Yes.
This is my question that I always ask. What's the status of the comprehensive plan?
You don't even let her get her first meeting in without just going after her on it.
It is in limbo right now, but I hope to get it started soon. And I hope I have the support of this commission wanting that to move forward.
Yes. You have a comprehensive plan committee raring to go. We've been set for months.
Anything else from staff? No? We have no public left in the room to comment. So at this point, I will ask if there is a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Moved by Lindwall,
Second.
second by Aravallo. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
We stand adjourned until our next meeting, which is on Wednesday, September 14th, 2022 at 7 p.m. here in council chambers. Thank you, everyone.